The sea crashed against the jagged cliffs of Whitmore-on-Sea, its salt-stained winds howling through the moorland grass. Alice Pembroke stood on the path leading to the manor, clutching her coat tighter as the chill seeped through the fabric. Before her, Cliffside Manor loomed, its windows dark, its stone walls streaked with time and rain. She had not seen the place since she was a child. Now, it belonged to her. A letter from the solicitor had arrived 2 weeks earlier, informing her that her late aunt, Lady Evangeline Pembroke, had left her entire estate in Alice's name. No explanation, no conditions. Just an address, a set of keys, and a note in Evangeline's elegant handwriting that read, "The house will find its voice once more." Inside, the manor smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Cobwebs hung like lace in the corners, and the air carried the stillness of long-forgotten rooms. Yet something about it felt alive, as though the walls themselves remembered every whisper, every footstep that had ever passed through them. Alice wandered through the grand hallway, her footsteps echoing off the marble floor. Portraits of Pembroke ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following her in silence. She paused before the largest one, a woman in a deep crimson gown, her expression serene yet mournful. Beneath it, a brass plate read Lady Evangeline Pembroke, 1893. In the music room, sunlight filtered through tall arched windows, revealing a grand piano covered in a thin veil of dust. Its black surface shimmered faintly beneath the light, like something waiting to be touched. Alice reached out and brushed her fingers over the keys. A single note rang out, soft, trembling, and impossibly pure. The sound echoed through the manor and seemed to fade into the sea beyond. Startled, she drew her hand back. The piano lid shifted slightly, as if moved by an unseen hand. Alice froze. Then the sound came again, 3 delicate notes, played in sequence. A melody, faint and hesitant, as though someone were testing whether she was listening. Her breath caught in her throat. There was no one else in the room. Outside, the wind howled, and somewhere in the distance, the sea crashed harder against the cliffs. The piano fell silent. And then, softly, from behind her, came a whisper, low, almost tender. "Welcome home, Alice." The next morning, pale light seeped through the lace curtains of Alice's bedroom. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving behind a thick mist that rolled across the moors like silent ghosts. For a moment, Alice wondered if what she heard in the music room had been nothing more than the tricks of a restless mind. Yet, when she descended the grand staircase, she found the piano lid still open. The faint scent of lavender lingered in the air, stronger now, as if someone had walked through the room only moments earlier. She tried to shake it off, making herself a cup of tea in the cold kitchen. The manor was vast and lonely, every creak of the floorboards echoing like footsteps that didn't belong to her. The only comfort was the sound of the sea beyond the cliffs, steady and alive. Later that day, while exploring the library, Alice found an old wooden chest beneath the window. The lock had long rusted, and with a gentle push, it gave way. Inside were stacks of yellowed letters tied with faded ribbon, and a leather-bound journal with a silver clasp. The handwriting on the first page made her chest tighten. It was Evangeline's. October 3, 1893. "The waves are merciless tonight. He promised he would return before the storm, but I know he will not. The sea keeps its secrets, and I am one of them now." Alice read further. The entries told of Evangeline's affection for a man named Samuel Graves, a young composer who had once been employed to restore the manor's piano. Their love had grown in secret, hidden from the eyes of her husband, Lord Henry Pembroke. One final entry stopped her breath. "He knows. Henry knows about Samuel. The piano plays our song when the storms rise, as if the sea itself remembers what he did. If I am gone when this is found, let the music speak for me." Alice closed the journal, her hands trembling. A gust of wind swept through the open window, scattering the letters across the floor. One of them slid beneath a tall cabinet beside the fireplace. As she bent down to retrieve it, her fingers brushed against a small latch hidden in the woodwork. A hollow click followed. Slowly, the cabinet swung open to reveal a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. The air that drifted up was damp and cold, carrying the faint echo of a piano note from somewhere below. Alice stared into the blackness, her heart pounding. Then, as if answering her silence, the melody began again, soft, haunting, and heartbreakingly beautiful. It was the same tune from last night. The same song that once belonged to Lady Evangeline and Samuel Graves. Alice hesitated at the top of the narrow stairwell, her candle flickering wildly in the draught that crept up from below. The air was damp, filled with the scent of salt and something older, like stone that had tasted centuries of silence. She descended slowly, one step at a time. The stairs were uneven, carved directly into the rock beneath Cliffside Manor. Her heart pounded as the faint melody grew louder, each note echoing along the curved walls. At the bottom, she found a low passage that opened into a small chamber. The candlelight revealed a vaulted ceiling of rough stone and a single wooden chair placed beside an upright piano. Its ivory keys were yellowed with age, yet one corner shone faintly, as though someone had polished it recently. Alice's breath caught. On the floor lay sheets of music, handwritten, faded, and torn. The title at the top read, Evangeline's Lament. Her hand trembled as she touched the paper. A drop of wax fell from the candle, landing beside a smudge of something darker, something that looked eerily like dried blood. She took a step back, and her heel struck against something buried beneath a torn cloth. Pulling it aside, she gasped. It was a violin case, cracked and weathered. Inside lay a violin, its strings broken, its wood stained. The initials SG were carved faintly near the neck. Samuel Graves. The air seemed to grow colder. A whisper drifted through the chamber, soft as the sea breeze, yet unmistakably human. You shouldn't have come here. Alice spun round, the candle nearly slipping from her hand. The shadows stretched across the walls, shifting as though something unseen had just moved past her. Her voice quivered. Who's there? Silence. Only the faint echo of her own words. Then, the piano played a single note, clear, sharp, and impossibly near. The candle extinguished itself with a hiss, plunging the room into darkness. Alice's heart thudded in her chest. She could hear the sea above, distant thunder rolling across the cliffs. And then, beneath it, another sound, slow, deliberate footsteps ascending the staircase she had come down. Someone, or something, was leaving the chamber. And it wasn't her. The following evening, the fog returned, thick and heavy, wrapping the cliffs of Whitmore-on-Sea in an eerie silence. The manor stood like a shadow among the mists, its windows glowing faintly from the firelight within. Alice had locked the cellar door behind her and pushed a heavy chair against it, though she wasn't sure why. The rational part of her mind told her that she was simply frightened by her own imagination. Yet, each time she closed her eyes, she could still hear that faint piano note echoing from beneath the floorboards. She tried to distract herself by reading more of Lady Evangeline's journal. The entries grew darker, her words filled with longing and fear, and her tone shifting from hope to despair. He says the sea took him. But I saw the footprints that led no further than the cliff's edge. The tide cannot wash away guilt. The words made Alice's skin crawl. She looked up from the pages, feeling suddenly watched. The flames in the fireplace flickered as though stirred by a breath that wasn't hers. Outside, something brushed against the windowpane. A shape, a pale outline, moved through the fog. Alice rose slowly, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She went to the window and wiped the mist from the glass. A woman stood in the garden. Her hair was long and black, her dress rippled as though caught in an invisible wind. The woman raised her face toward the window, and even through the fog, Alice saw her eyes, dark, hollow, and filled with something unspeakably sorrowful. Alice stumbled backward, the journal falling from her hands. When she looked again, the figure had vanished. Only the fog remained, swirling like smoke above the damp grass. Moments later, a knock echoed through the manor, 3 slow, deliberate taps on the front door. Her breath hitched. No one had visited Cliffside Manor since she arrived. Gathering what courage she had, she stepped into the hall. The door loomed at the far end, its brass handle gleaming faintly. The knock came again. She opened the door a crack. A man stood there, a stranger in a long dark coat, rain dripping from his hat. His eyes were sharp but kind, his voice calm when he spoke. "Forgive the intrusion, Miss Pembroke," he said. "My name is Dr. Lawrence Wells. I'm the local historian. I believe you've found something that once belonged to Lady Evangeline." Alice stared at him, still gripping the door. "How do you know that?" He paused before answering, his gaze flicking briefly to the piano behind her. "Because," he said softly, "I heard it playing last night, from halfway across the moor." Dr. Lawrence Wells stepped into the hall, wiping the rain from his hat before setting it aside. His eyes traveled around the manor with quiet reverence, as if he were walking through the pages of a history book he had long studied. "I've spent years researching the Pembroke family," he began, his voice steady but low. "Your aunt's story was one of tragedy and mystery. Lady Evangeline was adored in this village once, but her life ended under clouds no one ever truly understood." Alice poured him a cup of tea, her hands still trembling slightly. "I found her journal," she said. "She wrote about someone named Samuel Graves, a composer. She said he disappeared." Dr. Wells nodded gravely. Samuel Graves was a gifted musician who came to Whitmore-on-Sea in 1892. He restored this piano, yes, but he also wrote several original pieces for Lady Evangeline. The two were inseparable, or so the townspeople whispered. Then, one night during a violent storm, he vanished. The next morning, the cliffs were littered with debris, and footprints that ended at the edge. Alice's pulse quickened. "So he drowned?" "Perhaps," Wells said. But what made it strange was what followed. Lady Evangeline withdrew from society, shut herself inside this manor, and the servants began to report hearing music playing from the cellar during every storm. The same melody, Samuel's composition. He looked at her meaningfully. Evangeline swore the piano was haunted. She believed Samuel was still here, trying to tell her something. Alice swallowed hard. "And then she died?" "Yes," Wells replied. 2 years later. The coroner ruled it an accident. She fell from the same cliffs where Samuel was last seen. But, he hesitated. The villagers said they heard the piano playing as her body was found. The fire crackled. The sound of the waves grew louder outside. Alice rose and walked toward the music room, her voice little more than a whisper. "I heard it too, Doctor. It played when I arrived, and again last night. I even found a hidden staircase leading to a chamber beneath the manor." Dr. Wells's expression darkened. "A chamber?" "Yes. There's a piano down there. And I found a violin with Samuel's initials carved into it." For a moment, Wells said nothing. Then he stood, his chair scraping softly against the floor. "Miss Pembroke, you must promise me something. If you hear that piano again, do not go near it. Some melodies are not meant for the living to follow." Alice met his gaze. "You think it's dangerous?" He gave a slow nod. "I think the house remembers too much." Outside, thunder rumbled again. And from somewhere deep beneath the floor, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of a single piano key being pressed. Both of them turned toward the sound. The piano answered with 2 more notes, soft, deliberate, and full of sorrow. The storm had passed, but the air within the manor was still charged with something unseen. Every creak of the timber sounded like a sigh, every flicker of the candle stretched the shadows longer along the walls. Alice could not sleep. The faint notes that had echoed through the floor lingered in her ears like a whisper she could not quite shake off. She rose from her bed, wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders, and stepped out into the corridor. Dr. Wells was asleep in the guest room, or so she thought. She moved quietly down the stairs, the wood cool under her bare feet. Her lantern cast a trembling circle of light ahead as she approached the hidden panel behind the bookcase. She pressed it open. The scent of dust and salt air met her at once. The narrow staircase coiled downwards into the dark, the same one she had discovered days ago. But tonight it felt different, alive, somehow. She could hear a faint hum, as though the very walls were breathing. As she descended, the sound grew clearer, a melody, soft and mournful, weaving through the damp air. It was the same tune she had heard from the piano upstairs. When she reached the bottom, her lantern revealed the small stone chamber once more. The piano stood silently in the center, its surface covered with a thin layer of dust except for the keys, which gleamed faintly as though touched by invisible hands. Alice hesitated. "Samuel," she whispered. The air shifted. A single key pressed down, producing a low note that vibrated through the room. Her heart pounded. "What do you want from me?" The answer came, not in words, but in music. 3 notes. Then 4. A pattern repeated as though beckoning her closer. She stepped toward the piano, hand trembling as she reached out. Her fingers brushed the keys, and the lantern flickered violently before extinguishing altogether. Darkness swallowed her. The melody continued, louder now, faster, until it filled the chamber like a storm. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Alice's breathing echoed. She could hear something else now, the scrape of a chair, the faint rustle of fabric. She turned sharply toward the sound. A figure stood in the far corner, faintly visible in the lightning that flashed through a narrow window slit. A man in a dark coat, his face half-shadowed, his eyes hollow yet fixed upon her. "Who are you?" she breathed. The figure stepped forward. The dim light caught his features, a pale face, water glistening on his hair, and eyes that looked centuries tired. When he spoke, his voice was a whisper, yet every word struck through her like a chord. "I have waited for her return." Alice's throat tightened. "You mean Lady Evangeline?" The man's expression wavered, sorrow and longing twisting through it. "She promised to play for me once more. But she never came." "I am her niece," Alice said softly. "Why are you here?" He looked down at the piano. "Because my soul is bound to the last note she played. Until the melody is complete, neither of us can rest." A sudden gust swept through the chamber, the keys trembling under invisible force. The melody began again, but this time, it sounded unfinished, yearning for its final chord. Alice felt an impulse, an understanding she could not explain. She sat before the piano and placed her hands upon the keys. The ghost watched silently as she began to play. The notes rose and fell, filling the chamber with aching beauty. Then, instinctively, she struck the final chord. The air seemed to shatter with light. The figure smiled faintly as his outline began to dissolve into mist. "Tell her, the song is done." And then he was gone. The piano fell silent. Only the echo of that final note lingered, soft, eternal, and at peace. Alice sat motionless, tears running down her cheeks. But as she lifted her head, she noticed something glimmering on the piano's lid, a gold locket, engraved with 2 letters, E and S, entwined. She reached for it, opening the locket to reveal 2 portraits within, Evangeline and Samuel, smiling together. At that moment, she realized the haunting had never been meant to frighten her. It had been a plea, for completion, for closure, for love left unfinished. But as she turned to leave the chamber, her lantern flickered back to life, and on the wall behind the piano, words began to appear, carved by unseen hands. "Play it again, when the storm returns." The following days at Cliffside Manor passed in uneasy quiet. The sea below was calm, the gulls circled lazily above the cliffs, and the piano had remained utterly still. Yet, the locket never left Alice's hand. It felt warm, as though something inside it still pulsed with memory. Dr. Wells, pale and anxious, kept urging her to leave the manor. "It's over, Alice. Whatever haunted this place has gone. You've done enough." But Alice was not certain. "No," she replied softly. "It doesn't feel finished." That night, as the sky bruised with gathering clouds, she sat once again before the piano. Rain began to tap against the window panes, soft at first, then harder, until the whole manor seemed to tremble under the weight of the wind. She opened the locket and placed it gently atop the piano lid. The initials glimmered faintly in the lightning's glow. Then, as if in answer, one of the keys pressed down by itself, producing a low, haunting note. Alice drew a sharp breath. "You said the song was done," she whispered. The air in the room thickened. Curtains fluttered though the windows were closed. The chandelier above swayed, crystal droplets chiming in unison with the growing storm. Then she heard it, faint at first, then rising, a woman's voice humming the same melody she had played in the underground chamber. Evangeline. The name escaped Alice's lips without thought. The humming grew louder, clearer, until the very air seemed to sing. A shape formed beside the piano, a woman in a flowing gown of pale silver, her hair falling in soft curls, her face illuminated by sorrow and grace. Lady Evangeline Pembroke. Her eyes, though tender, were filled with longing as she looked upon Alice. "He has found peace," she said gently. "But I cannot yet." "Why?" Alice asked, her voice trembling. "Because the melody was never ours alone," Evangeline whispered. "It bound more than love, it bound a promise. A soul cannot rest if the truth of its silence is hidden." The floorboards groaned, the room shuddering. The storm outside had reached its full fury. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief illumination, Alice saw something glimmering beneath the piano. She knelt, lifting the carpet, and froze. A loose floorboard. Beneath it, a small box wrapped in silk. With shaking hands, she pulled it free and opened it. Inside lay a bundle of letters, their paper brittle, their ink faded. The first one bore the initials T.H. Thomas Harrington, a name she had never heard before. As she read, her heart pounded. The letters spoke of jealousy, betrayal, and rage. Thomas Harrington had been Evangeline's husband before she ever met Samuel. He had discovered their affair, and one night during a storm, he had gone missing near the cliffs. Except, one of the final letters was from Samuel himself. It confessed that Thomas had not vanished by accident. He had fallen, pushed during a fight fueled by guilt and desperation. Samuel's final line was almost unreadable through the tears that had blurred the ink. "I buried him beneath the piano that held our song, where no one would hear his silence." Alice dropped the letter, horrified. The truth hit her with the force of thunder. The piano was not merely haunted, it was a grave. Evangeline's ghost knelt beside her. "Now you understand," she whispered. "It was never just music. It was his cry beneath every note." Tears streamed down Alice's cheeks. "What do you want me to do?" "Free him," Evangeline said. "Let the earth breathe again." The storm roared louder, as if the manor itself resisted. But Alice, with trembling resolve, took a nearby candle holder and struck it against the wooden floor. The piano shuddered at the impact, its strings vibrating in protest. Again she struck, once, twice, until the wood cracked and splintered. Beneath the broken frame, dark soil began to spill out, and with it, the faint outline of bones long forgotten. A final flash of lightning filled the room, blinding and brilliant. When Alice opened her eyes, both the spirit and the piano were gone. Only the empty space remained, silent, still, free. Outside, the storm began to fade. The sea, once wild, turned calm again. Alice stood alone in the quiet room, holding the locket close to her heart. She whispered softly, "It's over." But as she turned to leave, a faint sound rose from the cliffs beyond, the distant echo of a piano chord carried by the wind, soft and mournful, fading into the night. Weeks passed after the storm, and Cliffside Manor settled into quiet once more. Alice moved through the halls with a cautious serenity, each step measured, aware that the manor had stories that stretched far beyond her own lifetime. She placed the locket on the piano, now restored and polished, though she never played a note. It glimmered softly, a reminder of unfinished lives and silent voices. Dr. Wells visited often, cataloguing letters, journals, and fragments of history that had been hidden beneath centuries of dust and secrecy. Together, they pieced together the lives of Samuel and Evangeline, and even Thomas Harrington, ensuring that their stories were no longer forgotten. One evening, Alice wandered the cliffs, the locket safely in her pocket. The sea was calm, its surface reflecting the silver of the moon. The wind carried faint notes, a melody that drifted across the waves. She paused, listening as the tune shifted and changed, almost playful now, lighter than she remembered. Somewhere in the distance, a figure appeared in the moonlight, tall, transparent, smiling faintly. Not frightening, but serene. Evangeline, perhaps, finally at peace. Or maybe someone else entirely, bound to the legacy of the music. Alice did not fear. She closed her eyes, letting the melody fill her, the song of love, loss, and redemption weaving through the night. It was a song that would live beyond walls, beyond storms, beyond time itself. The piano in the manor remained quiet, yet she knew it would play again, when the wind was right, when the storm returned, when someone was ready to listen. Alice turned back toward the house, a small smile on her lips. She understood that some stories are never truly finished, they are carried forward, in whispers of music and memory, waiting for the next listener to hear them. And somewhere, across the cliffs and the sea, a faint chord echoed, a promise that the melody of Whitmore-on-Sea would never fade. The manor was quiet. The night was calm. And yet, the music lingered, soft, eternal, and ever watchful.